see it. What is it?
We got it!
What is it? Will there be any more of them?
Hey Ghost Heads, it's Devin from Channeling Spirits. In Western society, our concept of ghosts has evolved throughout the centuries. When people report encountering ghosts, they're often invisible, interacting more with the environment or objects. In fact, ghosts are often described with every other sense but sight. Disembodied voices or footsteps, phantom touches, cold spots, and unexplained odors. When they are seen, they often have humanoid forms with only vague details. Orbs and shadows have been reported, but often they are mostly human. The problem with trying to illustrate an invisible being has haunted human history. We are visual creatures that like to communicate through shorthand. As society has progressed, we've developed a set of symbols and tropes that can easily convey concepts. For ghosts, that symbol has become a floating sheet.
Is this what we've been reduced to, sheets?
Think of them as death shrouds, and the moaning is important. Really moan.
The stereotype dates back to the practice of burying bodies in winding sheets or burial shrouds. If a restless spirit were to return, they were supposedly seen still clad in their sheet. As mass media took off in the 20th century, the shrouded figure became instantly recognizable as a ghost. But when Dan Aykroyd began mulling over a ghostly comedy, he imagined them differently.
In Dan's original script, I remember there was a little prologue that said that the random mesh of microwave transmission had torn a hole in our reality envelope, and spirits and entities from the other side were entering our reality through these holes, which was great. Danny's script started with the Ghostbusters already being in business. Paranormal events were happening all over New York, and Ghostbusters was kind of an established franchise.
Dan's first draft, Ghost Smashers, was a far cry from the 1984 hit that manifested. Aykroyd's original treatment was set in the then future of 2012, and there were several teams of ectoplasmic exterminators. Venkman, Stantz, and Ramsey were to be played by John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, and Eddie Murphy, respectively. The spirits in this treatment were not always human, but rather extra-dimensional beings. In Making Ghostbusters by Don Shay, he explains, "The root of New York's widespread psychic disturbances lay in the fact that a Zool, a generic name for the other-dimensional creature which would later evolve into the Terror Dogs, had somehow strayed out of its rightful time and place and was being held captive by the Ghostbusters' employer, himself a trans-dimensional being."
Everybody getting this so far?
So the trio were less ghost hunters and more interdimensional exterminators.
What are you supposed to be, some kind of a cosmonaut?
No, we're exterminators. Somebody saw a cockroach up on 12.
The entities in that early script were more imaginative than the stereotypical sheet. The onion head ghost, that would later be called Slimer, was in the original treatment and trapped in the first few minutes. As Don Shay puts it, overall, the onion head entrapment follows, with a fair degree of faithfulness, the opening sequence in Dan Aykroyd's solo script. As originally drafted, the Ghostbusters respond to a call from the Greenville guest house regarding the discovery in the kitchen of a gluttonous yellow mist, or grotesquely altered human form, a FRVP, or free repeating vaporous phantasm in Ghostbusters lingo. After chasing the apparition, described as onion-headed at one point, through the rustic guest house, the Ghostbusters corner it in the basement, encircle it with neutrino beams, and maneuver it into a small collapsible trap. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was also in this early draft, but instead appeared halfway through the film as one of the many forms that Gozer manifested as. When Harold Ramis came on to co-write it, he grounded the film in the present in our reality, but many of the fantastic depictions of the ghosts remain. Concept artists Bernie Wrightson and Tom Enriquez leaned into the wild designs. The Ghostbuster specters have such varied appearances, it's only natural to wonder how the boys differentiate them. The earliest reference to classification comes from the August 5th, 1983 draft. This line is stated almost verbatim in the final film.
Sir, what you had there was what we refer to as a focused, non-terminal repeating phantasm, or a Class 5 full-roaming vapor. Real nasty one, too.
This passing statement has been expanded in novelizations, role-playing games, television shows, video games, and comic books. It has become a whole system of classification that ranks the spectral potency of ectoplasmic manifestations. But where does it come from? The Ghostbusters universe mentions several esoteric texts. In the first film, Peter mentions the Roylance Guide to Dana Barrett.
I'll bring the Roy Lance guide and we'll eat and read.
The August 5th, 1983 draft of the script reveals the full title to be The Roy Lance Catalog of Secret Sects and Societies. The novelization, Ghostbusters The Supernatural Spectacular by Richard Mueller, calls it the Roy Lance Guide to Sacred Sects.
Sex? Yes, please.
Its full name indicates this book focuses more on cults and secret societies, so it's likely it didn't originate the spectral classification system. Egon and Ray also mentioned 2 other books.
Yeah. I could look for the name Zool in the usual literature.
Spade's catalog.
Tobin's Spirit Guide.
Yeah.
In 1986, West End Games released Ghostbusters, a frightfully cheerful role-playing game. It revealed the full name of the Spates Catalog to be The Spates Catalog of Nameless Horrors and What to Do About Them. Though the title was expanded, the game did little to elaborate on its contents. The text that has seen the most expansion is Tobin's Spirit Guide. While Spates' catalog is only mentioned once, Egon later mentions finding an entry in Tobin's.
The architect's name was Ivo Shandor. I found it in Tobin's Spirit Guide. He was also a doctor, performed a lot of unnecessary surgery. And then in 1920, he started a secret society.
In Ghostbusters The Supernatural Spectacular, as Egon is listening to the table in the library, Peter slams down a copy of the Spirit Guide.
Oh, you're here.
Tobin's Spirit Guide is repeatedly mentioned in the animated series, The Real Ghostbusters.
Tobin's Spirit Guide.
According to Tobin.
Tobin's Spirit Guide.
Tobin's Spirit Guide.
In addition to Tobin's.
Tobin's Spirit Guide.
The show gave us an occasional glance as to what was actually in the tome. Then in 1989, West End Games gave us one of the most complete looks at the contents contained within. Tobin's Spirit Guide was released as a supplemental source book for the RPG. Penned by Kim Mohan, the book is presented as an abridged version of the guide, edited by Ray Stantz. It includes an introduction by Ray, where he recalls having a dream of running into a building before it is demolished and grabbing an unseen item. 2 days later, he finds himself seeing his dream played out in reality. After running into the building, he recovers a first edition of J.H. Tobin's Spirit Guide, being a compendium of ghosts, gods, spirits, and manifestations from outside the normal realms of existence, with a travelogue and notes on philosophy of the occult established by the author. The author is given a full name for the first time, John Horace Tobin, as well as a backstory. The first edition was published in October 1920, and the sourcebook includes the original introduction by J.H. Tobin. The work is divided regionally, with the first section covering Egypt and Asia, the second encompassing Great Britain and Western Europe, the third Eastern Europe, and the final section Eastern America. Ghostbusters Afterlife finally showed us what a first edition of Tobin's Spirit Guide actually looks like. Following the RPG, J.H. Tobin is listed as the author. In Ghostbusters Afterlife, the art and making of the movie, production designer Francois Oudy discusses the book. It was really exciting to imagine what a first edition copy would look like. The design was inspired by old first edition leather-bound books one might find in a rare book collection. Pages included ghost classifications and a section about Gozer the Gozerian and terror dogs. We only see a few passages in the final film. Podcast opens to an entry on water spirits. Turning the page, he finds one on Gozer the Gozerian, with illustrations of Zool and Vince Clortho.
The Sumerians believed in a land of the dead, a dark and shadowy realm within the bowels of the earth. The souls of the dead are ruled by a mighty god, Gozer, and protected by a powerful gatekeeper and keymaster, in order that Gozer might rise up and walk the human plane again. The gatekeeper and keymaster must assume the form of beasts.
The next day, Podcast identifies Muncher as
Free-floating metal muncher. Definitely class 5.
Considering he recently read from the Spirit Guide and Francois Oudy's comments, it's likely that J.H. Tobin designed or popularized the classification system. In Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Podcast asks Phoebe,
So, catch something crazy lately? Anything try to bite your arm off, like class 5, class 7?
So far the films have only mentioned those 2 classes. Traditionally, the scale has topped out at class 7, but where did that come from? In the 1985 novelization, Ghostbusters The Supernatural Spectacular, it describes a class 9 autonomous roaming disruptor. Peter gets a call from Bill Hibbler, a reporter at the National Reporter who had run a piece revealing Venkman's past as a carnival barker. Unbeknownst to Hibbler, PETA released the Class 9 into their editorial offices. It jammed typewriters, exposed film, set fires in wastebaskets, overflowed toilets, popped light bulbs, and sang obscene ditties through the phones. What are ditties? What are fucking ditties? It was actually Ghostbusters, a frightfully cheerful role-playing game that established the Class 1 through 7 scale. Ghostbusters, the video game, was the first piece of canon media to recognize the role-playing game's popular system. Its ghosts were classified in a manner consistent with the definitions laid out in the RPG, but what about the phantoms found in the films? Only Slimer and Muncher have ever been directly classified, so let's break down the others. Before we get too far, we need to talk about psychokinetic energy, or PKE. Psychokinetic is a compound word which combines psyche, meaning breath, spirit, soul, or mind, and kinet, or kinetos, meaning to move.
Does anybody speak English here?
In the Ghostbusters universe, PKE is a yet unidentified energy, which allows the mind or consciousness to interact with the physical plane. In the films, we've seen humans demonstrate psychokinetic abilities from telepathy, precognition, and pyrokinesis. If a person dies and their consciousness or spirit lingers on the earthly plane, they can only interact with the physical world by using PKE. Not all the ghosts seen in Ghostbusters are human, though. PKE can also be used by animal spirits, a collection of ghosts, or something else entirely. The classification system is ultimately a grading scale on how much PKE an entity is currently or capable of using.
Oh, I think we hit the honeypot. There's something brewing under the street. I've got 118 on the PKE.
2.5 GeVs on the Geiger meter.
Well, what does that mean?
West End Games describes Class 1s as undeveloped forms, insubstantial and difficult to see. Interaction with their environment is limited and enigmatic, i.e. spectral lights, voices and sounds, ectoplasmic vapors, etc. These entities are only capable of using some PKE to manifest in limited ways. It can also be a byproduct left over from a higher class of spirit. Ghostbusters the video game catalogs environmental materializations like ectoplasm as Class 1s. The Digital Tobin Spirit Guide describes it as a thick, slimy substance. Ectoplasm is formed when ghosts interact with the physical world. Usually seen as a viscous, mucus-like slime,
Egon, your mucus.
ectoplasm has been encountered in mist-like and even crystalline forms. Ectoplasm comes in a variety of colors. In the first film, we see clear and green ectoplasm. In Afterlife, Muncher has a blue residue, while Frozen Empire showed yellow and black slime. Of course, the plot of Ghostbusters 2 revolves around another ooze, psychomagnetheric slime.
Mood slime.
Unlike ectoplasm, psychomagnetheric slime congealed from the misery and anger of 3 million New Yorkers.
Negative human emotions are materializing in the form of a viscous psychoreactive plasm with explosive supernormal potential.
Contact with ectoplasm hasn't been shown to have any side effects, while mood slime can alter one's emotional state.
Oh, dear Ray, what are we doing? I was ready to kill you.
Another Class 1 is seen during the Ghostbusters 2 montage. The boys enter Auraphores and find an invisible force levitating several pieces of glassware. The polarity reversal tripods are enough to disrupt the PKE bonds and disperse the disturbance. The lack of a visible form is indicative of Class 1s. In Ghostbusters Afterlife, another invisible ghost guides Phoebe and Callie. It makes its presence known by interacting with various objects. We eventually find out the entity is Egon Spangler. It's possible the recently deceased have to learn to manifest a physical form by using PKE.
Can't see you, right? In the book, rule number 2, the living usually won't see the dead.
Won't or can't?
It just says won't.
Since Dr. Spangler does this later, it's possible he was intentionally manifesting as a Class 1. Entities are shown to be capable of altering their forms, based on the PKE expended or available. When the containment unit is released, the escaping spirits appear as orbs. Zool and Vince Clortho also take on orb forms in Ghostbusters Afterlife. In addition, Zool can become invisible, a mist, a sentinel form, or the more familiar terror dog. These lower forms require less PKE and allow a ghost to travel without expending as much energy. Any spirit manifesting with this lower level of PKE is considered a Class 1. According to West End Games, Class 2s are vague, inconsistent, or incomplete materializations, like floating sheets, ghostly hands, or animated lips?
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Don't look at me. I think these people are completely nuts.
Ghostbusters The Supernatural Spectacular expands on Janine's line,
"Is it just a mist that doesn't have arms and legs?"
She checked the multicolored wall chart that Stans had drawn up. That sounds like a Class 2 anchored phantasm, serious but not necessarily harmful. If it was just a mist, then it would have been a Class 1. The spirit had accumulated enough PKE to have some semblance of its old body, but not enough to be fully formed. Anchored proximity phantasms are tied to a specific area, as opposed to a full roaming vapor like Slimer, which is shown to travel from the Sedgwick Hotel to the Rockefeller Center to the firehouse. In small amounts, psychomagnetheric slime is inert and considered a Class 1. When it's concentrated into larger amounts, the PKE increases. Psychomagnetheric slime fiends can begin to develop anthropomorphic characteristics, like the hand in the river of slime or the mouth in Dana's bathtub. They have some level of intelligence, but can also be controlled by other spirits. The psychomagnetheric slime fiend in the Barrett's bathroom was trying to grab Oscar for Vigo the Carpathian.
What happened?
Something came out of Dana's bathtub. Tried to grab her and the baby.
Class 2s are also capable of possessing and animating small objects. Given their tendency to scuttle on the ground, these spirits are called crawlers. Ghostbusters the video game had a variety of Class 2 crawlers, which animated candelabrum and gravestones. Ghostbusters 2 showed a similar spirit when a mink coat came to life. Another animated object was seen in Frozen Empire.
Mind your fingers. It's possessed by an evil spin doctor, CD.
The disc had enough PKE to animate the CD player housing it. While Class 1s can be harmless or easily dispersed, Class 2s can be more destructive. The mini-puffs appear to be animated marshmallows, which came to life as PKE rushed through Gozer's gateway. The PKE meter's taser was enough to destroy some of them, but they are definitely resilient.
What are you doing?
It's a nightmare.
Class 3s are anonymous hauntings. They have enough PKE to have a distinct human form and personality, but the form or identity, i.e. as a living being, is not established. If it is established, the ghost is reassigned as Class 4. Just like Casper, who doesn't remember much of his previous life.
I wonder why you don't remember anything. Guess because when you're a ghost, life doesn't matter that much anymore.
Indistinguishable entities like the Fort Demiring Phantom fall into this category. She has a distinct form and is certainly able to interact with the physical world, but we never learn who she is. Some Class 3s can only be identified by their career, like the bellhop, construction worker, and cook ghosts seen in the 2009 video game or the zombie cab driver of the first film. The Supernatural Spectacular describes the cabbie as a palpable reconstructor type 3 who had been dead for 15 years. A similar palpable reconstructor is seen in Ghostbusters Afterlife, this time one of the many miners who jumped to their death at Shandor Mines.
One by one, miners who had worked for years began leaping down the mine shaft to their death. They called it the Shandorian Curse.
Bonesy, one of the ghosts contained in the Paranormal Research Center, is a Class 3 distinct human form according to the Hasbro Fright feature figure of Phoebe Spangler. Considering its skeletal appearance, it may be similar to the zombie cab driver and miner. While Class 2s can possess smaller objects, the increased PKE of Class 3s allows them to take on larger forms and even people. Ghostbusters the video game featured Class 3 possessed statues. Despite its size, the Statue of Liberty also falls into this category. The possessed toaster seen in the sequel contained enough mood slime to make it move, but was still only a Class 2. The Statue of Liberty, which had substantially more slime, still required Jackie Wilson for her to come down off her pedestal.
Oh, good slime, good slime. Winston, is our slime in a good mood tonight?
I hope so. She's a lot bigger than a toaster.
Throughout the films, we see several humans possessed. Louis Tully, Dana Barrett, Janos Poha, Ray Stantz, Gary Gruberson, and Callie Spangler. The PKE required to puppet a human is significant, but not extraordinary. As mentioned, Zool and Vince Clortho have the ability to travel utilizing less PKE. Possessing humans allows the terror dogs to travel as Class 3s.
Gozer's protected by two evil spirits, the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper. She needs both of them. No Gatekeeper, no Gozer. But first, these spirits must possess two human souls.
Like Mom.
A possessed human can usually be exorcised by a slime blower, but other Class 3s usually require entrapment. This can be seen with the Jogger Ghost in Ghostbusters 2, which didn't need to be worn down by proton streams to be entrapped. According to West End Games, a Class 4 has an identity that is established. They have a distinct human form and personality, with a known identity such as General Custer or Cleopatra. The first ghost we see, the Grey Lady of the Library, might appear as a Class 3. However, Ghostbusters the video game established her identity as Eleanor Twitty, and that she is indeed a Class 4. Given her ability to transmogrify into a terrifying second form, she likely has a significant amount of PKE. Another ghost with a clear identity is Melody. She specifically remembers her past and the tragedy that killed her.
Well, the last match burned my family alive, so...
Yeah, well, that'll do it.
No, it was an accident.
Several Class 4s are shown or referenced in Ghostbusters 2. As mentioned, psychomagnetheric slime can be used by spirits to enhance their form. Judge Wexler's anger allowed the mood slime to grow, eventually reaching a tipping point where the Scoleri brothers could merge. The judge immediately recognized them.
Scoleri brothers! Friends of yours? I tried them for murder! Gave them the chair!
The duo may have been Class 1s who passively haunted the courtroom, but the slime's spike in PKE allowed them to manifest as two Class 4s. They aren't the only ones bolstered by the slime. In life, Vigo the Carpathian was an occultist.
He was a very powerful magician, Dr. Rinkman, and a genius in many ways.
Despite being poisoned, stabbed, shot, hung, stretched, disemboweled, drawn, and quartered,
ouch,
Vigo's spirit survived, anchored to his self-portrait. While in storage, Vigo could do little but wait.
Death is but a door, time is but a window, I'll be back.
Vigo's ability to manipulate psychomagnetheric slime allowed him to elevate his PKE, but originally he was only a Class 4. Possibly an occultist, or at the very least a cult leader, Ivo Shandor likely falls into this category. As the penultimate boss in the 2009 video game, Shandor's spirit is originally a Class 4. In Ghostbusters Afterlife, it's not clear what he is. Given he opens his eyes while in his coffin, his body seems to be in suspended animation. Considering the sound he made when Gozer ripped him apart, his body was still...
juicy.
Yes.
Gozer's emergence in 2021 caused a psychokinetic storm. These conditions also allow lower classes to harness or siphon PKE. At the end of 1989, Marilyn Klotch talks about meeting Fiorello LaGuardia.
I spent an hour last night in my bedroom talking to Fiorello LaGuardia, and he's been dead for 40 years.
Like Egon, he may have been merely an invisible Class 1, barely interacting with the physical world. However, as PKE became abundant, they used it to take on more familiar forms and become Class 4s. Both Spangler and LaGuardia showed that spirits are not always malevolent. While the Scoleri brothers required entrapment, both Egon and Melody were able to cross over peacefully.
Have you ever wondered what happens when we're all done here?
I mean, I've seen it. Yeah, I mean, it's really beautiful, actually. I mean, your particles start to lose their bonds and float off into space.
Then what?
Most human spirits don't surpass being a Class 4. The RPG states Class 5s are ectoplasmic manifestations of definite but non-human form. Speculation includes the theory that Class 5s are formed from emotionally charged events, or as side effects of ritual summoning. West End Games hypothesized that Slimer was a byproduct of rituals from a cult that met in the basement of the Sedgwick Hotel. Ghostbusters the video game and IDW Comics expanded on this origin. In the 1920s, Evelyn Lewis was a resident of the Sedgwick Hotel on the 12th floor, room 1221.
Well, most of the original staff knows about the 12th floor. The disturbances, I mean.
Lewis was also a member of the cult of Gozer. The Ghostbusters 2017 annual showed her hosting high-ranking members of the cult, including Cornelius Wellesley, chairman of International Steel, Edmund the Collector Hoover, and Ivo Shandor. For their loyalty, they would become guardians of the Mandala nodes. These summonings brought about the spirit known as Slimer. The annual says it was never human. It's simply a representational force given form with partially humanoid characteristics and tendencies. Muncher, another Class 5, devours inorganic material like metal. Both have voracious appetites, despite being unable to digest anything. They may be both hungry ghosts. In several East Asian myths, hungry ghosts have emaciated limbs, huge stomachs, and throats as narrow as a needle. Ghostbusters Afterlife, the art and making of the movie by Ozzy and Inguanzo, says Muncher is a Class 5 spirit who was conjured into existence by a seance gone wrong in the 1940s. After terrorizing the group that contacted him, he found himself trapped in the factory manager's office where the conjuring took place. Other Class 5s from various montages have semi-humanoid features, including the subway ghost from the first film, the cinema specter from the sequel, and the bug-eye ghost from Afterlife. We don't get any backstory on them, but they are similar in size to Slimer and Muncher, making them most likely Class 5s. In Frozen Empire, we see two new Class 5s, Pukey, and
It's the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon.
the Hasbro Ecto-Stretch tech figure of Gary Gruberson describes Pukey as a Class 5 full roaming vapor. I'd argue he doesn't roam, but roll.
How'd you get all the way up here?
Despite both being translucent blue and dwelling underground, the subway ghost and sewer dragon are not the same creature.
We were going through versions with Gil and Jeff, and we were kind of scratching our head, why is this not working? And then we looked back at the 84 movie, and there was the ghost that cocomes out of the sewer. I'm not remembering the name of that particular character, but there's a ghost that comes out of the sewer that's kind of, or not out of the sewer, but out of the subway.
Yeah.
And we're like, that's our inspiration right there.
Considering the sewer dragon has a definite but non-human form, it's safe to assume it's at least a Class 5. West End Games says these typically require extensive proton pack implementation to eradicate. We see this in the films with Slimer needing 2 streams to subdue him, and Muncher able to chew through a single stream. Phoebe's stream is barely able to hold on to the sewer dragon before being entrapped. While one ghost trap could contain 2 Class 4s, Class 5s have enough PKE to require their own trap.
Well, that wasn't such a chore now, was it?
The role-playing game refers to Class 6s as ghosts from lower life forms. A giant penguin was once seen attacking a mugger in Central Park. Later, it was discovered that the penguin was a ghost.
Holy jeez. Look at what we got here. That silly penguin is back again.
No, Mr. Madison, they're not penguin. You got too much sun today. They're no penguin.
Okay, so that's not incredibly helpful. Ghostbusters the video game showcases several Class 6s which are gigantic, but not penguins. After defeating Pappy Sargassi, a Class 4 roaming animator, he returns as a Class 6 bidimensional attractor. Known as the Kitchen Golem, Sargassi is one of the few deceased humans to reach this classification.
Egon, Ray, this is something new for us, isn't it?
First one I've ever seen. It's some type of highly focused anthropomorphic animator. An entity which attracts familiar objects to itself so it can materially manifest its rage.
We find out later that the Sedgwick Hotel is a mandala node, used for concentrating PKE. When the boys return to the hotel, the Spider Witch, another Class 6, is also able to transform the environment and command Class 2s. Other bidimensional attractors, or golems, are also a composite of objects in their environment. However, none of them seem to be previously human. For example, book golems are said to be formed from overly energetic PKE-charged books in the public library. Class 6s can also be a composite of several spirits who collectively appear. Sort of like a psychokinetic rat king, these ghosts become entangled together after experiencing a shared traumatic event like the sinking of the Titanic or the derailment of the city of Albany.
I think that was the old New York Central, City of Albany. Derailed in 1920, killed hundreds of people. Did you catch the number on the locomotive?
Sorry, I missed it.
Given the amount of PKE, Class 6s are often large or massive. The Washington Square Arch is 73.5 feet tall. In Ghostbusters 2, we see a gigantic ghost hunched over and inside the arch. It's one of the largest spirits we see on screen. Given its size, the behemoth is more than likely a Class 6. We see another dangerous entity in Frozen Empire.
Now this one is the most threatening pest in the whole complex. Possessor. This spry little weasel can occupy any inanimate matter it wants.
Hasbro's Fright Features Callie Spangler figure says it is a Class 8 full possessor, but it's more likely a Class 6. While Class 2s can possess a single object, the possessor moves quickly between multiple, able to easily control items as large as a lion statue or the Ecto-1. In the films, we've never seen the Ghostbusters defeat a Class 6. The closest we get is in Frozen Empire, when Slimer eats the possessor while it's trapped in a pizza. West End Games says unique solutions are often required to handle these entities, including research into habits, allergies, natural enemies, etc. This is certainly true for the final class. Class 7s are described as metaspecters. Obsessively malevolent, exceptionally powerful, and exhibiting control over subordinate forms. Such entities are potentially very dangerous. These are often identified by primitive cultures as demons. This also includes demigods, gods, and any entity with a phenomenal amount of PKE. The Roylance Guide refers to Zool as a demigod.
Well, okay, I found the name Zool for you. Well, the name Zool refers to a demigod worshipped around 6000 BC by the... what's that word?
Hittites.
Mesopotamians and the Sumerians.
Like its master, Zool is capable of taking on many forms, from a Class 1, a Class 3, and a Class 7. It's unclear if its true form is that of a sentinel or a terror dog. While extremely powerful, it's ultimately subservient to Gozer.
What are we doing today, Zool?
We must prepare for the coming of Gozer.
Vince Clortho, Keymaster of Gozer, is another Class 7. He's never mentioned as a demigod, and he's definitely less capable than Zool. Still, like the Gatekeeper, he is able to take on many forms, easily possess humans, sort of, and is extraordinarily strong. Its master Gozer is a Babylonian god of the dead.
Sumerian, not Babylonian.
Yeah, big difference.
Gozer is incredibly powerful. Superhuman strength, energy projection, transapparation, form manipulation, telepathy. It's, well, a god. When it takes on the form of Stay Puft, it's able to materialize a 110-foot Marshmallow Man from its PKE.
Funny us going out like this, killed by a 100-foot marshmallow man.
Psychomagnetheric Slime on its own seems to only be able to advance as far as a Class 2. Like we mentioned, Vigo was able to significantly elevate himself by manipulating the River of Slime. At the end of the film, he had elevated himself beyond simply being Vigo the Carpathian.
Also known as Vigo the Cruel, Vigo the Torturer, Vigo the Despised, and Vigo the Unholy.
He could control the Class 2 Mood Slime Fiend, bent both Janosch, Poha, and Ray to his will, formed a slime wall, and empowered Poha with PKE abilities. Nanny Poha was able to levitate, alter his appearance, and even extend his physical form to inhuman proportions. As a kid, I had no idea this was Janosch.
God, it was a ghost!
No, that was Janosch.
What?
Like Gozer, Garaka is described as a god.
That orb is a magical prison for a phantom god called Garaka.
Both were worshipped thousands of years ago and described as interdimensional beings.
An ancient god from another dimension.
Given his icy powers, Garaka seems able to absorb energy, capable of drawing in enough heat to reduce the surrounding temperature to absolute zero. It's likely he also absorbs PKE and can bend most other ghosts to his will.
We think it's commanding the other ghosts with some sort of mind control.
We see ghosts as low as Class 2s entranced by his orb, and even the Possessor, a Class 6, heeds his commands. He is even able to absorb energy at a subatomic level, rendering normal proton streams useless. Class 7s are incredibly powerful, but not without weaknesses. Zool was able to be contained in the RTV and seemed almost afraid of the PKE meter taser. Gozer was initially stopped by a matter-antimatter annihilation when the streams were crossed. It learned from this and was able to uncross the proton streams. It took an entire field of 198 traps to contain it and the Terror Dogs. Garaka was subdued with fire and Phoebe's brass-plated proton pack.
His icy spell was shattered by a roving band of mythical spirit catchers called the Fire Masters, who used fire and brass to trap the evil god inside of an orb.
Ultimately, it took turning the containment unit into a massive ghost trap to pull in the Phantom God. But what about the real Ghostbusters? It technically takes place in an alternate timeline where the first film is actually a biography of their exploits. The first episode, Ghosts Are Us, mentions the classification system in the first few minutes.
We have 3 Class 5 full torso apparitions.
Those 3 ghosts establish a rival paranormal elimination business and seek out another entity, Turlock, in an abandoned toy factory in Brooklyn.
Yeah, Turlock's in there. He's the Class 7 Phantom who haunts this dump.
The trio discovers a much larger entity now resides there and is scared off the Class 7.
That's at least a Class 8 free-roaming vapor.
Worse, a full magnitude Class 10.
The animated series quickly established that ectoplasmic manifestations could be classified as at least 1 through 10, though some would later exceed that.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
The only example of a Class 1 was published in Now Comics, issue number 21. The poltergeist has an appearance similar to Slimer, but is arbitrarily assigned as a Class 1. We know the real Ghostbusters regularly encountered Classes 2 through 4.
4 Class 5s in 1 week.
Don't forget the 8 Class 3s.
And the Class 2 in Mrs. Fiorino's linguine.
However, it's hard to say why any ghost falls into those classifications. While visiting his hometown, Ray encounters a couple of Class 2 specters in the Palo Mansion.
Class 2 mini-wraiths, regular scaredy spooks.
And other Class 2s are mentioned throughout the series, but with no justification.
I wouldn't rule out a Class 2 area aberration.
Readings indicate it's at least a Class 3.
The sequel series, Extreme Ghostbusters, also mentioned Class 3s, such as the Jersey Devil.
It sounds like you're dealing with a Class 3 biopheric specter, a demonic life force inhabiting iron ore and other minerals.
The Wish Giver in Extreme Ghostbusters, as its name implies, could alter reality and grant wishes. Despite this power, it's only ranked as a Class 4.
We may be dealing with a Class 4 psychoreactive specter.
Another Class 4, the Ectoclones, are able to self-replicate at a rate which nearly destroys Manhattan.
Apparently, we're dealing with a Class 4 self-replicating specter. Extremely rare.
Considering these abilities, you'd think that they would rank higher. In fact, the Class 5s mentioned in the original series seem weaker than them.
It's definitely a Class 5, and it's in the elevator shaft.
He works with a sidekick, a Class 5 named Shifter.
However, the Class 6s shown in both series are significant threats. We see this with the Roller Ghoster, a roller coaster possessed by a collection of deceased circus animal spirits.
It's made up of the ghosts of all those animals. Class 6 focused apparitions. They can't leave.
Which is similar to the role-playing game's definition of Class 6s. Some have noticeable intelligence, like Tempest, who led a ghost uprising.
These readings are consistent with a Class 6 bitemporal apparition, capable of coexisting simultaneously in 2 different times.
Or Akira, who is able to trick Kylie under the guise of being her great-grandmother and spread an ectoplasmic pestilence.
A Class 6 SPE, somewhere in the immediate vicinity.
Class 7s are inconsistent in their strength. Some, like the Domoviet, are merely household spirits, invisible and anchored to their house.
Bassin Games awakened at least 12 separate Class 7 plastic free-floating repeaters.
While others, like the Boogeyman or Habanagaric, are some of the strongest opponents the Ghostbusters face.
I'm sorry to have to tell you that you've got what seems to be a Class 7 repeating corporeal entity residing here.
Mikra fed on other ectoplasmic entities every 1,000 years, and in doing so created deserts. Its presence prompted ghosts to willingly enter the containment unit and fill it to capacity. Because of this, Mikra was considered a Class 8.
Definitely a Class 8!
Given its power, it's odd that Simon Quegg's horse and buggy are a class above that.
It and the horse are powerful Class 9 specters. Quegg's merely a Class 6. He's not strong enough to resist them.
Only a few entities are mentioned higher than a Class 10, including the Ghostmaster, who commanded several other spirits.
According to Who's Who in the spirit world, the Ghostmaster rates as a Class 11.
Extreme Ghostbusters rates the eye-stealing Tenebrog at the highest classification.
A Class 13.
Class 13? We've never seen one of those.
What makes him double the threat of the Boogeyman is unclear and is never mentioned. The animated classifications varied wildly and make it impossible to create a universal system across all forms of media. Still, what do you expect? It was a cartoon from the 80s based on a dark comedy with oral sex and smoking. It wasn't groundbreaking or consistent, but it definitely expanded the audience and the lore of Ghostbusters. Hopefully the next time you see a toaster dance or a Sumerian god walks into your path, you'll have a better understanding of how to go toe-to-toe with it. If you enjoyed this video and think we deserve it,
alright, that was cool.
Please subscribe. I'm Devin with Channeling Spirits, and thanks for watching. I don't know what the fuck a ditty is.